A healthier, happier life begins here. Welcome to Mercy Moments, a podcast by Mercy Health in association with True Chat.
Back to school safety, a topic that we may not always think about when we think about kids' safety, but one that's certainly important. We're going to learn about why today and what you should be on the lookout for. My name's Justin T. Weller. I'm the guest host of Mercy Moments. We're really glad that you've tuned in today. I typically host the podcast, The State of Us, on True Chat, and we're proud to have partnered with Mercy Health for this podcast. I'm joined today by Terry Seeler, who managed outside of healthcare for a while, is an entrepreneur, and is currently the radiology supervisor at Mercy Health Urbana Hospital. And also Laura Willis, family nurse practitioner who works at Mercy Health Urbana Family Medicine and Pediatrics. She also managed to raise 2 kids all the way to adulthood despite some of the dangers of back to school. How important is early morning transportation to the overall safety process? And we'll start today with Laura.
One of the things that I think is most important is considering where a family may live. There are different things to think about if you live in town versus living out in the country, for example. Some of the things that apply to both of those locations, though, are for parents and high schoolers who drive, the person driving the car. It's very important to be aware of school buses, to be aware of traffic laws, knowing when you have to stop, how far back from a bus you need to stop, always being aware that there may be kids crossing a street if you're near a school zone, and spending some time learning where school buses are most likely to stop in your community or on your road so that you're more aware, especially on very foggy mornings or mornings when there's bad weather such as rain or snow.
Typically when people are going to school, this is a rush hour time, right? Usually. Especially in the morning when you're going to school, maybe not as much in the afternoon. So in addition to the going to school traffic that you have, you've got everybody else who's trying to go places, and you've got the differences and the challenges between urban and rural communities. What would you say any of those are, Terry?
Well, there's definitely a difference between your strategy in the rural communities versus the urban communities. In the rural communities, typically it's going to be dark out when you go out to wait for the school bus, then the ride's going to be pretty lengthy. So tips for kids would be something like wear brightly colored clothing, stand away from the road because it's going to be dark out. For urban kids, you're around a lot of people you don't know. So typically try to travel in groups and keep your phone on you and do things like that.
So definitely some differences based on where you are and taking that into consideration. One of the things that I wonder about is there a place that people can go to learn more about the specifics and the differences? I know that we have some different information referenced today, so we'll be sure to link to that. But I know, Laura, you've got some info pulled up in front of you there. Did you want to tell people what we've got and where they can look at that?
I looked when I was preparing to come and talk this morning. I looked at several places. Actually, I just typed into Google, how do I keep my kids safe before school? Several things popped up, one of which was the United States Department of Transportation. There's an entire list of things to think about if you are driving, if you're a parent, if you're a kid walking to school, if you're a bike rider. Lots of kids who live in town will ride their bikes to school, and they need to understand things like wear their bike helmet, follow the traffic rules, stay in a bike lane if there is one. So the Department of Transportation has some really good, quick tips for all sorts of people to think about first thing in the morning. Consumer Reports actually has an interesting article that I found online about back to school transportation and how to keep your kids safe.
So when your kids were growing up, what was that process like? I mean, did you take them to school? Was there a bus? How did that work?
We were fortunate enough to live about 3 blocks from school.
Oh,
so
wow.
They walked to school until they were in high school, and then they rode the bus. We spent a lot of time talking about how to safely cross the street, look both ways, make sure there's not oncoming traffic. If there was a traffic light, to always cross with the light. When they started to ride the bus, we talked about, go to the bus stop and stand on the sidewalk, not in the street. I see that happen a lot in town. Kids will gather in a group and they tend to migrate toward the street rather than staying back on the sidewalk where they're more safe. So we just reviewed that every year about this time in August, and off they went.
So is the biggest preparation thing that parents can do Terry, is that mainly sit down and talk with kids about this, or is there other things that they need to be taking steps to do?
I think they definitely need to sit down and have a conversation with them. That's for sure.
I know that because we're actually, this studio is located on the property that I grew up on. We're out in the country here where we're located, and the bus would come down a hill. And on foggy mornings, it would be difficult to see. So when I first started riding the bus, which was first grade for me, the first, couple of weeks, actually, I think my parents stood out there with me, made sure, okay, this is, where you're going to stand. And you don't go towards the bus, right, until you're motioned to come toward it. Because while in town, there's the challenges of probably more traffic. Out here we're on a highway, so to speak, and you have cars moving at least 55 miles an hour. So you've got fog, you can't see. I think that's important, especially because when you have kids that are younger, right, they're not thinking about this stuff. It's a little different when you're talking about high schoolers and they're driving, but then the safety tips are probably different too. As a parent, what should the parent be going over with them now that they're driving themselves, as opposed to and possibly picking up other kids? Like, what comes into play there?
One of the things I think that is the most important thing we can do is be a good example to our children, and not text and drive, and explain to them how very dangerous that can be. Encourage them to actually turn their phones off, stow it in a book bag so the temptation is not there. Teenage drivers may or may not have more accidents than other drivers of different ages, but when you factor in the possibility of texting and driving, it doesn't matter what age you are. If you're distracted, you're more likely to have an accident. You could hurt yourself, you could hurt a passenger, you could hurt someone else. So I think that's one of the things that we need to think about when we're sending our high schoolers off in their own cars to go to school.
So an important statistic, because you brought up the texting and driving thing, in 2019, so this year, 36% of 18 to 24-year-olds that were surveyed admitted to texting while driving, although they estimate the number is probably significantly higher than that. And of those that admitted to it, 48% of them said they thought that driving under the influence of alcohol was more dangerous than texting and driving, when in reality, it's actually the opposite. It's more dangerous to text and drive than it is to drive under the influence of alcohol. So something important to keep in mind, because you'd probably, right, if you polled most teenagers, we have it right here, they'd say that you probably should not drink and drive. Now, that doesn't mean they don't do it, but it means that they're aware of that, right? Because the school educates on that. But the texting and driving is probably a big one, because in addition to most kids possibly driving to school now, you've also got most kids that have a cell phone now, right? So that becomes, and that's not just texting, just to be clear too, right? We're talking about using the phone at all.
Absolutely.
On social media, whatever you're doing.
Putting on makeup.
Yeah.
Picking their favorite song to listen to on the radio. Do that before you pull out of the driveway. Don't do that while you're driving down the street. So any phone use, I think it's important to turn those off, stow them in their book bag in the back seat so there's not even the temptation.
So with, a lot of what's been going on, a lot of what we've been seeing in the media, and just recently near to us, we're in Urbana, Ohio, which is about 45 minutes from Dayton, where there was a mass shooting recently. And when we're talking about that, when people are hearing about this, getting to school and that safety may not be at the forefront of people's minds. And so one of the things that we want to look at isn't school safety itself the most important component? Arguably more important than safety on the way to school. So we're going to look at that. But before we do, we're going to take a brief moment to remind you of a couple things. One is that access to the Mercy Moments podcast, you can find it at mercymoments.org. You can go there to find both resources to the material that we're referencing in today's program, but you can also go there to find all the different ways to listen. So if you're listening for the first time on the web, you want to listen in the car on the way to work, you can do that. And all the links are provided right there for places like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. So please be sure to check that out. And the reason that this podcast is underway is because Mercy Health Urbana Hospital is committed to the ongoing communication effort with the community. And this is part of that effort, being out there and providing information at no charge so that people have access to, I think so far, what we'd all agree have been very both relevant, but also very topical conversations and things that people may not always think about. For example, childhood drowning was one that we talked about last time. Not always happy subjects in and of themselves, but nonetheless very important because, we learn things like that's the third leading cause of accidental death amongst adolescents, something that I didn't know. And it makes you take it more seriously and be more aware of it. So we're really grateful that Mercy Health is taking that opportunity. And Mercy Health is producing this podcast in association with True Chat, which is an organization that produces podcasts for other organizations working on inspiring tasks. And Mercy Health is proud to be helping True Chat achieve its mission, which is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And hopefully that's what we're doing here today. With that, we'll get back to the topic at hand. We're talking with Terry Sealer, who is a radiology supervisor at Mercy Health Urbana Hospital, and Laura Willis, the family nurse practitioner working currently at Mercy Health Urbana Family Medicine and Pediatrics. So isn't school safety itself the most important component, Terry?
It definitely is the largest component. A lot of schools have hardened their processes. They've done things like come up with an organized plan in case there's an active shooter. They installed cameras, installed ballistic windows and doors into the facilities, and limited access during school hours. So they've definitely done quite a bit to improve the safety of the facilities.
Even with the new schools that Urbana just recently finished, and the students have been occupying now for, I believe, 2 years. The whole system is restricted access, both leading up to school hours and during school hours. And of course, all the main entryways have cameras. So these are some of the things that schools have done. What should parents be talking about to their kids in regards to school safety? And this goes beyond, just the arrival and departure from school, but also during school, recess, playground, etc.
One of the things that we can talk to our kids about is how to recognize that there may be trouble in the hallway, paying attention to the sounds that are going on in the hallway, what's happening outside the classroom door. Is there an unusual amount of chatter? Are they hearing sounds that they don't recognize that they shouldn't be hearing in school? Helping them to understand, sadly, that they need to assume the worst about those noises. If they're hearing a pop or a bang in the hallway, they need to assume that it could be something like an active shooter situation. Schools are doing a very good job of teaching their students how to respond to that. There's a training called Run, Hide, and Fight that a lot of schools are implementing. I believe it's called ALICE training. That helps students understand how to respond. They can talk about where to go, how to barricade their classrooms to protect themselves, or where to run if they're going somewhere to hide or to get off campus. One of the other things we can do is help our students, our children, to recognize danger signs in their peers as well. Kids that are keeping to themselves, that are avoiding groups, that may be giving some kind of indication that this would be something that they're thinking about.
So real quick, in other words, the thinking here and what we should be telling kids, is if they have a suspicion or concern, then they should probably say something, right? In other words, don't hold it in, because if it's nothing,
absolutely,
no harm.
Always better to address a potential problem head on than to ignore it and have it become something much bigger.
Right, because in a number of the incidents that have occurred over the past few years, the worst of incidents, where we have shootings and people are injured or people die, there were lots of times where we hear later that peers even were suspicious, or had concerns, but that those may not have been brought forward. And that's certainly by no means shifting the blame to anyone, but it does say that there are things that can be done, by others to help prevent these types of situations and to keep schools safe, by simply being aware and listening to your instincts. Because if something feels wrong, there's a chance that something is wrong, and better to let an adult know and let them handle that than to stay silent with it.
Absolutely. And if we shift to something, a little more common and a little more likely to happen, let's talk about how to keep kids safe on a playground.
Yeah.
They can also do the same kind of thing if they see a piece of broken equipment, they see, a crack in the sidewalk that could be a tripping hazard, something like that. It's something that simple. If they see that, they could also let an adult know, let their teacher know, let the principal know, so that we can keep those things safe. There are choking risks on a school playground. If a kid has on a scarf or a necklace, or, somebody who's snazzied up and gone to school wearing a tie, they could get that caught on a piece of playground equipment. It could be a strangulation hazard. So being aware of their body and the risks that are potential, even when they're outside just having fun.
Right.
Being aware that if they hit their head, they need to tell somebody. Head injuries can be very serious and may not show up right away. So just, being aware of what's going on with their friends. Stand in a single file line if you're all going down the slide. Don't push and shove up the ladder, kind of a thing. Just explaining to them, basic rules of the playground will keep them safe while they're at school doing something that should be fun.
So let's shift and talk a little bit about after school safety. We've looked at what do we do on the way to school? What do we do while we're at school? But what about after school? And how is this different than on the way to school? Sometimes you have kids, right, who are waiting longer, maybe on school grounds, or maybe they're being transported someplace else, like locally here. You've got a latchkey program, for example, where kids are going to be transported someplace prior to going home that they're going to be waiting at. All right. So Terry, tell us a little bit about some of the statistics as it relates to preventable deaths and injuries after school.
Well, just like how the schools have hardened their facilities to prevent mass shootings during school hours, they have processes in place to handle various issues after school as well. For example, they generally try to limit the amount of potential damage by sending kids out in groups and positioning the teachers throughout the schoolyard and allowing them to communicate with each other. So in case something happens, they can, via cell phone or walkie-talkie, they can warn the other teachers that there's an issue that needs to be addressed.
So it's not only, though, it's a safety thing, but it's also an efficiency thing that helps get kids to where they need to go faster. I know that Urbana City Schools just this year actually put in place a software program that manages their bus routes now, for example, to not only more safely move kids around, but also save money and time by making bus routes, for example, more efficient. And that's not just in the transportation of them, but also in the arrival and drop-off program as well.
But during school time and after, they have a very regimented process of controlling access to the kids. So generally the kids only go to the bus or go to the parents at the very last moment. They don't hang around in the same areas as the kids, or vice versa. That if parents are picking the kids up, the parents wait in a general area and then the kids come out all at one time. The same thing when they put them on the bus, that the buses line up, the teachers get in position, and then they send the kids out in groups, get on the bus and then take off. So in other words, if there was a mass shooter or something like that, they'd have very little access to the kids. They have that window would be very, very small.
How has this changed in recent years? Or even over a longer period of time, from when maybe you were in school or from when Laura was in school? What's it like now versus what it used to be like?
So back in, I'm not even going to say what year, when I was getting ready to get out of high school, I can remember the bell would ring at the end of the day and 1,000 kids would go through the hallways, go out the doors, and find their bus that was parked generally in the same spot every day, but not always. We'd all be out in the school driveway, the front of the school, getting on our buses, some people walking home, and everybody was out all at the same time. Several years later, when my kids were young and in school, if I went to pick them up at the end of the day, for example, the bell would ring and the kids riding the bus went out the front door to the buses. The kids riding home with mom or dad went out a side door, and they waited in the building until the parents pulled up and said, "I'm here to pick up my child," and you had to give their name. Then they'd call for that kid who would come out. And we did that as a line of cars through a side driveway. when some of my friends' kids were younger, even a few years after that, they would have to go through a line, have their kid's name on the sun visor of the car that they'd flip down for the teacher to read prior to their child coming outside. So they've made drop off and pick up from parents in individual cars a very systematic process so that there are not dozens of kids in the driveway potentially getting hit by cars, potentially getting snatched by someone who's not their parent. There is a very, very concerted effort on the part of our public educators to keep our kids safe. And it's something that I think they deserve a lot of recognition for. They work on this throughout the year. They've put lots of things in place to keep their students safe, which is commendable.
Well, and it's also definitely is, but there's, I think also, right, what we have to take into account is it's always a balance. I mean, you don't want this to be an overwhelming part of the education process. And I think part of the way that we avoid that is by having these types of conversations and making sure that parents take, we're not talking about, right, doing this every day for the whole school year. We're talking about taking the steps to talk with your kids about it a few times so they understand it's serious and you make it real for them. And so that hopefully you're avoiding those situations to the extent that you can. And if you're in a situation, whatever that situation is, where there's danger, you're better prepared to handle that situation. So I think a lot of this and a lot of what we talk about on this podcast is just being informed about it so that it's not catching you off guard. So it's not, well, I didn't know that was something that we need to be thinking about, right? But it very much is.
Absolutely. I think it's important to get that balance between making our kids afraid to leave the house and having them be smart when they're not at home.
Yeah. Smart and responsible, right? Thinking, vigilant, but also enjoying the learning process and making sure that we're keeping the things that ultimately hinder that process out of it altogether. Keep kids safe while they're at school.
I had an interesting story actually to that about how times have changed.
Okay.
That I went to a leadership seminar one time, and Carrie Anderson, the ex-CEO of Wendy's, told a story about how when she was a kid, she actually drove the school bus because in the Deep South, there was a shortage of school bus drivers and you could make $10 an hour. So with a little bit of training, and once you turned 16, you could actually drive the school bus. So she's like, thinking about how times have changed and how protective we are with our kids nowadays. It's just amazing that a kid could actually drive the school bus.
Very different, that's for sure. And again, that balance, right? Because we don't want to over shelter, but at the same time, we want to make sure kids understand that it is important to be aware of this stuff and to be thinking about it. So what other resources are out there? We mentioned a couple before, but we want to reiterate them now.
One of the things I found was the United States Department of Transportation has lots of hints on how to keep your kids safe on the way to and from school.
So you can go to their website, find those helpful tips there. And of course, you can go to mercymoments.org or mercyhealth.org for more information. And a reminder, too, that new episodes of Mercy Moments are available the third Tuesday of every month. So once a month, you can get a new episode on one of these relevant and always important topics. A lot of times, things that you may not be aware of, the importance and also the severity of some of these situations. So please keep a lookout for those episodes, and we'll plan to see you all the next third Tuesday of the month. Special thanks to Terry Sealer, who is the radiology supervisor at Mercy Health Urbana Hospital, for being here. And I think a future host of the program, right?
Yes.
A little sneak peek for people. And Laura Willis, who is a family nurse practitioner, for being here as well. Definitely appreciate the insight from both of you. For Mercy Moments on True Chat in Urbana, I'm Justin T. Weller. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change.